Welcome, everybody. First of all, for those of you who've done my courses, this is just a revision. I talk a lot about positive behaviour support, understanding the diagnosis so you understand why things like consequences will rarely work for students. So, for example, a child with autism spectrum disorder will have mind blindness, which you'll hear about in the replay of episode 99. Or a child with ADHD will have impulse control, which I don't talk about so much in this episode. So I just wanted to remind you that for many children with ADHD, it's executive functioning, which means you have to remember there's a consequence. You have to control your impulses and more. So we've talked about that at my courses. So if you haven't come along to a course, this is a great opportunity for you to be like, okay, I'm using consequences. Maybe it's time I go to one of Sue's courses. For a child with ODD, well, consequences seem authoritarian. So watch out. These kids do not respond to authority. And for a child with PDA, anxiety. Consequences are going to cause anxiety. So they're going to be so worried they're going to get something wrong. So these all the underlying conditions we need to understand. And that is why in my workshops, we spend most of the day being proactive and understanding the conditions, understanding neurodiversity and what that means and practical strategies to put in place. So actually me saying, well, here's what's probably not going to work. Here's what I would try. So actually helping you understand that. And I guess that's why I have 1,163 5-star reviews of my course. Like, it is mind-blowing. Check out what people say why you should do my course. I mean, I read it myself and go, I cannot believe people feel so positive because I don't know. I rarely give 5 stars. So I really appreciate all of you that have come along and given me a 5-star rating for my courses. So reminder, you can join me face-to-face. You can join me live virtual or online on demand. The way I look at it, there's no excuse not to do the course now because you can either do it in your PJs at home instead of watching Netflix. You can join me live virtual from anywhere in the world. And you get a replay to watch for 3 months after. So if you do join late or have to leave early because of the time difference, you can catch up on that later, or face-to-face if I'm coming near you. Anyway, it's just really important to understand that consequences really work. And the reason for that is going to be in this podcast replay that you're about to hear. But I just would love to say, if you find this podcast helpful, can you please share it with a friend? And if you enjoy my podcast, I would love you to leave a rating. I know lots of you email me and tell me how great the podcast is, and I really appreciate it. But I also do read all the reviews and ratings that people put up. The reason I ask you do that is so people can find it. Actually, when you share a podcast or when you put a rating, that actually helps people find the podcast because it's called the Sue Larkey podcast. So if you're looking for a podcast and you're a teacher or you're a parent or you work with children with autism or diverse children, you're probably not going to think to put in Sue Larkey in the search. I made a mistake when I named it, but we're stuck with that name now. So I just can't thank you enough if you would share it with people so they can find it and it'll make a difference to them. Thanks so much. Enjoy the replay. Hi everyone, welcome to the Sue Larkey podcast. As I always say, you have to embrace difference to make a difference. Let's dive into today's podcast. Well, welcome everybody. I must say, I'm super excited about this episode. I've probably spent the last 6 months thinking about it, thinking why this is so important. So this podcast is about why traditional or common behaviour strategies rarely work for kids with autism spectrum at home and school. I've had parents do positive behaviour courses that are designed for neurotypical kids, not neurodiverse kids. I've had parents of children with oppositional defiant or PDA who go to these courses and actually try the strategies and get exhausted and disheartened because so many of those courses are designed for neurotypical kids, as are the traditional things that teachers learn. So whether you're an educator or a parent or a grandparent, Well, whoever you are who knows a child who learns and engages differently, or if you've tried traditional behaviour strategies and they don't work, this episode is for you. We are going to do a deep dive into looking at, well, okay, what are some of the things people tell should do that tend not to work for these kids? But before we do that, I want to remind you my 3 golden rules when working or living with kids with autism spectrum, ADHD, ODD, PDA, any of these letters and names we hear, particularly when it comes to behaviour. Number 1, every child is different. To know someone with autism is not to know autism. To know a child with ODD is not to know ODD. I have taught a couple of hundred children with ODD, and I've never met 2 the same. They're all very different, just like you and I are different, just like my husband and his identical twin are different. We are all different, as are children who are neurodiverse. So please remember, every child is different. So therefore, not every strategy is going to work I talk about today. If things are working for you, then don't worry. You don't have to listen to that strategy. If you're like, well, my child, that's not a problem. The kid I know, that works. It might work. But I'm going to talk today about making some generalizations about things I've seen as a teacher that don't work, but also for parents that I know haven't worked. So I've worked closely with families and carers, respite carers, disability services, support workers. And over the years, I have seen people try to use these strategies someone well-meaning told them they should use, and they just didn't work. So the golden rules are everyone's individual. Not every strategy works for everybody. So I don't expect everything to work for you. And last but not least is strategies wear out. You might have tried some of these for a while and they wear out. And that is why I'd encourage you, in my books, I have over 500 strategies, because you go try another one. So what I'd encourage you to remember is keep trying. Strategies wear out. I don't know about you, but I'm a bit like that every year. I do a gym program or do something I enjoy, and then I stop enjoying it. I think we all have that. We have TV shows we like and they wear out. Things wear out, and that is life, or you get over it or you move on to something new. But the key is to keep trying new things to find the right things, particularly for children with ODD and PDA. I find strategies wear out twice as fast. So let's dive in deep to understanding why traditional and common behaviour strategies just don't work for these kids. And the number 1 reason why is a thing called theory of mind. Now, any of you who have Tony Attwood's book, The Complete Guide to Asperger's Syndrome, which is my go-to book. I mean, I've picked up my copy this morning to share with you, and it has so many bookmarks in it. But there is a whole chapter on theory of mind. I highly recommend you read it, chapter 5. So please, if you don't have this book, teachers, parents, anyone, it is a must-to guide. It's like having the world's best psychologist in your office or in your home. And the way I use the book is I would flick to the back of it. So if I want to understand more about speech or stress or violence or social cues or routines, start at the back of the book and then flick to those pages and read it. But if you don't understand theory of mind, I highly recommend you read that chapter. It's like 14 pages of gold. But I want to read to you what Tony's definition of theory of mind is. Theory of mind is the ability to recognize and understand thoughts, beliefs, desires, and intentions of other people in order to make sense of your behavior and predict what's going to happen next. It also has been described as mind reading or mind blindness. Now, sorry, as I read that, I am not, those of you who've listened to me try and read out loud before, it's not my strength. I'm a bit of a, I don't know what you call that, but when I go to read out loud, I'm sort of back in a year 7 classroom. I wonder if any of you are like that, where you sort of go, I hated reading out loud at school. So when I go to read out loud, I get a bit, So basically, most behaviour strategies rely on the child knowing what you inferred, what you meant. So many behaviour programs for traditional or neurotypical kids rely on you knowing what the person meant. And theory of mind, children on the spectrum have no idea what your inferred meaning is. They have no idea what your thoughts or beliefs are. They have no idea what the desires or intentions are of other people. In fact, they are literal. They're black and white. And so many of the strategies confuse these kids. So, for example, I have seen pet teachers say to children, "Oh, look how Nick sitting." And the child with ASD just looks at Erica. They don't know you meant sit like the child. Or I've heard teachers say, "I'm going to count to 3." And the child just, "Well, you're going to count to 3. Go ahead, count to 3. 1, 2, 3. You didn't tell them they needed to do anything after you counted to 3. Or I've had children where the teacher says 1, 2, 3, and the child keeps counting 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Or I've had children with echolalia where the teacher says 1, 2, 3, or the parent, and the child just goes 1, 2, 3. They have no idea you meant you're going to count to 3 and they needed to move or change their behaviour. So many of our strategies actually don't tell the child what you want. And if you have mind blindness or can't read what people mean and black and white literal thinker, how can traditional behaviour methods work for you? How can ignoring work? How can teachers saying to a child, "Don't do this, don't do that," and you're not telling them what to do? So I remember many years ago at a session, I was telling some parents, I was at a parent session, I was telling them, children always replace one behaviour with another unless you tell them what to do. So I said, if a child's hitting, you say no hitting, then they'll start kicking. And then you say no kicking, they'll start biting because you haven't told them what to do. So these parents in the front row just started laughing. And I went up to them in the back, I'm like, "What were you laughing at?" And they said, "You just described our son. We stopped him hitting, and then he started biting, and then he started kicking, different order." But it's exactly what happened because no one had told him how to ask his sister for the toy. So he'd hit her, then he got told no hitting, so then he tried kicking or biting. And so often we're telling the child, "Don't do this, don't do that," but we're not telling them what we want. And they can't read our minds. They have mind blindness. Like I say, read that chapter of Tony Attwood. They have done so many studies on this. Now, don't get me wrong. I have worked with teenagers and adults who have had help with theory of mind, who have done a lot of work around it and get better at guessing what we're thinking. But the rest of us innately know what people are thinking. And this is why so many of our kids struggle with social skills, because there's so much inferredness in social skills. There's so much, where children say, "Oh, I had a ball on the weekend," and they meant they had fun, or "We're going to go and do something," and the child doesn't know, am I part of that or not? And there's so much anxiety comes from that. So many of my children are exhausted trying to work out what you mean when you go 1, 2, 3. So many of my children have no idea about the consequences that you suddenly put in place. And often when you put in place consequence, the behaviours escalate because they had no idea that you were going to do that unless you told them. Saying to a child, "You'll be in trouble," doesn't tell them what trouble they're going to be in. You haven't been clear what the consequence is. And I have seen this over the years. Or Anna Tullemans tells this great story with Daniel, where I think Anna, who I've written a number of books with, and if you haven't got the Ultimate Guide to School and Home, please put that on your must-get book list this year. But Anna tells this fabulous story where she failed 2 positive parenting courses before Daniel was diagnosed, in that the strategies didn't work. And this is what I've seen over many years. And the one she tells that I just loved was, this was back in the day when we didn't have computers to make beautiful visuals and things. So they said to use the token economy, and tokens can work if the child understands what they need to do to get the token and what behaviour is required. You have to be very explicit. In fact, sometimes I'll have a photo or video showing the child what we're working towards. Anyway, Anna had said to Daniel, "When you get the stars in the boxes, we'll go to Kmart and buy the Lego aeroplane you want." So the next morning she got up and Daniel had put the stars in the boxes. He didn't understand he needed to earn those stars. She said, "When we get the stars in the boxes, we'll go to Kmart." Well, the stars are now in the boxes. Let's go to Kmart. Can you see he didn't understand theory of mind? He had no idea what he needed to do, and he was literal. And I hope you're laughing, imagining a child putting the 5 stars in the boxes and like, "Let's go to Kmart," because that's exactly how it was. He had no idea what was required. And this happens to so many of my kids, where they get quite distressed because They thought they understood what you were saying. And this is why often timeout doesn't work too, because that requires a child to regulate their emotions. You know, many of you have heard me say, never in the history of calming down has anyone ever calmed down. I don't know about you, but if anyone tells me to calm down, I get more worked up. But so often we'll sit a child out and expect them to reflect on their behaviour. How can a child reflect on their behaviour when really what you're asking them to do is theory of mind? Know what you thought they had done wrong. Now, don't get me wrong, if the child needs some space and some sensory downtime and some time to away from too much stimulation, often that's a great behaviour management strategy. But don't expect the child to sit out and know what they've done. For many of my children, consequences escalates the behaviour. The favourite of mine is when people say things like no. And no can send a child into a huge meltdown because they don't know what you wanted. They hear never again. When you say no iPad, they hear never iPad. When you say no chips, they hear never again for the rest of their life. No equals never. And I'll make sure I link to the Your Words Matter PDF that I made that has all the words that we say that confuse a child, like no running in the hallways. Don't we mean walk in the hallways? Or when we say the word don't get upset when you lose. Instead of saying when you lose, say to the other person, well done. Can we play again? You know, well done. I'll beat you next time. I don't know. You need to tell them what to do. Just saying don't get upset when you lose. You can't be first all the time. You can't do this. You can't do that. Don't do that. And for my literal kids, like my ODD kids, when you say, can you sit down? They'll just say no, because it sounds like a choice. Could, would, and can confuse children. And a lot of behaviour programs for traditional children would tell you should give the child a choice. But don't give them a choice if it's not a choice. Could you sit down is a choice. Well, was that meant to be a choice or not? Anyway, let my high horse run away because I want to tell you what to do instead. But in Tony Attwood, in that chapter I was telling you about, talks about how for so many of my children, it's the problem solving they're struggling with. And they often only have one solution. So therefore, the behaviour escalates. So they think they're doing the right thing. You say sit on the mat, but you didn't actually mean sitting on top of someone else, which is I've seen kids do that where they just sit in the wrong spot or at the back of the room. You need to be explicit. Sit here. Show them where they need to sit. So again, that's mind reading. Or I had one little boy who sat on the doormat of the classroom because there wasn't a mat. You know, he wasn't being naughty. He didn't understand. He thought he was doing the right thing. And so many of my children, when I go into classrooms, I see from the autism eyes, through the eyes of a child with autism, they are trying to do the right thing. They're not meaning to get in trouble. In fact, many of my children hate getting in trouble. They're very anxious children and they are very concerned. But so many of my children, they get into conflict and they don't understand why. They really don't. So I'd love you to put yourself in the kids' shoes and try and understand what it's like from their mindset. Because for many of my children, we're looking at things from our point of view. And for many of my children, they can't mind read, problem solve, or have trouble with executive functioning, which is that remembering, you know, or impulse control. They don't mean to grab that toy off their sister. It's just they're so excited by the toy. Or some of my children don't even notice another child's playing with it. They just see the thing they want. So I would love you to really focus on telling the child what to do, not what not to do. So you don't say to them, don't get upset when you lose, tell them what to do. We don't say, don't take Jessica's toy. We say, Jessica was playing with the toy. If you want a turn, you can ask for a turn. Now, what if the child says, no, they don't want to give you a turn? Well, you need to tell the child, when someone says no, they mean not now. They mean later. So you can ask, can I play with it when you've finished? Because they're definitely going to finish. Or you can go and play with someone else, or you can ask, can you take turns playing with it? But when a child says no, they don't always mean no forever. So you might write a social script, you might model that, you might practice that, you might talk to the other child and model, look, taking turns works. But make sure you actually think about what skills does the child need, not, oh dear, they're having a meltdown or having a tantrum again. No, there's a reason for that. There's always a reason. And often it's because they really don't understand what happened. So I love tell them what to do, not what not to do. Social scripts are amazing. And videoing, I love videoing. So for young children, because they love iPads and phones, why not video them tapping their sister if they're nonverbal and asking for the toy? Or in the classroom, videoing them moving from the table to sit on the mat and showing them their spot on the mat. You can video that and then they can re-watch it. And most of the kids I work with have a videotape in their mind how things are meant to look. So that is a brilliant way. Then reward them using their currency. Those of you who have attended my courses know I talk extensively about how to reward kids with ASD. But if you haven't done my course, please think about doing it in 2021. We'll be having virtual and online, and I'm probably going to do some across 2 afternoons. I mean, this podcast is a great way to get information. But if you join me for a day, I promise you will go away with so many tools, and people love it. They come back every year, but I highly recommend that you put it on your list to do in 2021. But in my course, I talk about how children on the spectrum are adult learners, and we need to take that into account. So, children on the spectrum, consequences rarely work. When's the last time consequences work for you as an adult? Children on the spectrum need to be rewarded with their currency, not gold stars. That probably doesn't mean anything to them. But maybe if you say every time you sit on the mat, you move from the table to the mat, you get a star. And when you've got 5 stars, you can have 5 minutes watching YouTube, or you can have 5 minutes with your Lego. Have a think, or 5 minutes on your PlayStation, whatever works for the kid But I highly recommend, I love tokens. It's just never take them away. It's always positive. I'm about positive behaviour support and how we can best support the children. I highly recommend thinking, well, when a child won't get off their device, did you give them a warning? Did you use a timer? Did you expect them to shut down too quickly? Did you allow enough processing time? These are what I call 50-50 behaviour plans. And again, talk about them in my workshops, but it's where 50% of a behaviour plan are the strategies and supports I can put in place, and 50% is the child following those supports and structures. So when I show a child how to ask for a turn and someone says no, they can say, well, can we share? Or can you tell me when you finished? They're actually implementing that strategy. But that's why I'm saying with some of your kids, that'll wear out and you'll need to come up with another plan. So constantly thinking, what can I put in place to support the child to be successful? So I always ask myself, is what we're doing working? Because sometimes, yes, then there's no need to change. What is the biggest challenge we have and want to change? And this is important. Look, imagine if someone went round all day changing you. We all have moments in the day we get angry, upset. We all have moments in our day that we're procrastinating. We don't want to micromanage this child, but which behaviour is impacting most on you and them? Often impacting on them too. So what is the biggest challenge? And what do we believe is the cause of that? Is it sensory? Is it wanting friends and not knowing how to have friends? Is it impulse control? Is it working memory? What is it that is causing the behaviour? And then what can we do to replace that behaviour or de-escalate it? What are the things we can put in place? And I believe it's about what are we going to replace it with? Because remember, they always replace one behaviour with another. So we need to think, what is the replacement and how are we going to teach that? I'm just going to write that down so I can put it in the notes for you to read. So what is the replacement behaviour? How are you going to get the child to do X, something new? And what is the child's motivation to do the new behaviour? How are you going to motivate them to do the new behavior? Now, sometimes the actual turn is the motivation. The child knowing where to sit on the mat. Sometimes when I show them that, it's a relief for them. That, as I say, they don't want to get in trouble. They're confused why they're in trouble sitting in the wrong spot. So do they know what to do? What supports do they need? So let's say the behavior is stopping one activity and starting a new one. So we call that transitional change. So let's pretend it's getting off the computer and coming to do work, or getting off the computer and coming to dinner. So let's pretend we're working on that. So let's talk through that above. So that we want the child to finish on the computer and move to a new task. So we want them to change. So did we have a visual schedule that showed them computer, dinner, computer, work? On our visual schedule, do we tell them where they're going back to the computer? Because some of my children need to know when they're going to get to go back on their computer. So is it computer, dinner, computer? Or is it computer, dinner, shower, read, bed, and then tomorrow computer again? I might need to remind them when they're going to go back on the computer. Or is it computer, work, lunchtime, computer? Where in their day are they going back on the computer? Because many of my children who love the computer need to know. Just like you like to know when your payday is. So those of you who have been to my workshops, I talk about, imagine if you turn up and your pay's not in the bank, how would you feel? So if the computer's their payday, when are they going to get paid again? And then let's think about, so what behavior are we getting now? Are they, when I tell them to get off the computer, saying no? Are they getting off the computer but running around the room? Are they ignoring me? What is the thing? So personally, I would use a timer and a 5-minute warning. I would remind them before they get on the computer what they're going to be doing when they get off the computer. I would have a visual. I'd have a timer that's a visual. And if you don't have a timer, put that on your must-buy list for 2021 too. So highly recommend a time timer. There's different sizes on my website. They are a game changer. Wish I had them years ago. I mean, I've been using them for 10 years, but I wish I had them for 30 years. So what are we going to replace it with? So what we're going to replace it with is the child getting straight off the computer and going to the table for dinner, work, whatever. How am I going to reward that? Am I going to give them a token every time? Am I going to give them extra computer time next time they go back on? Or we're just going to move. We're just going to give that all those structures are in place. I don't need to reward it. That I'm just getting them to follow the routine. And sometimes the routine's enough. My kids just love routine. So do they know what to do? Yes. When they get off the computer, they need to go to the table, eat dinner, or do their work. What supports do they need? That's the visual, the schedule, knowing when they're going back on the computer. So have a think about what is a behavior that you really want to change? What is the biggest challenge? I want you to maybe write it down. Take a moment. If you're driving, don't, but have a little think. What is something I really want to change this year? What is the biggest challenge we're getting? Is it going to bed, getting enough sleep? Is it getting to school on time for teachers? What is the biggest challenge? Is it actually getting them to do the work? Is it them grabbing a toy off their brother or sister? Or in a school, is it getting them to share equipment? Have a think. What is the biggest challenge? What are the supports and what can you replace it with? So I highly recommend you have a think about those things. And for me, it's really important to be proactive, not reactive. I find being proactive far more energizing than constantly reacting to children. Now, remember, they're going to replace it with another behavior if you don't get the right replacement. And it could take a while to find something that's a fit for that child. But positive, and just really check in, do they know what to do? Because for me, behaviour is communication. Now, I haven't worked with a child yet. I haven't wanted to climb in their brain and have a look around. But so often behaviour is communication. When that child gets angry when I say it's time to do work or dinner time, well, maybe I didn't give them a long enough warning. Maybe they needed a 10-minute warning. Maybe I need to think about why isn't that working? What is the problem? Oh, their game that they're on goes for 20 minutes and guess what? They're halfway through the game and they don't like stopping in the middle of the game. So maybe rather than it being a time frame, it's one game, then do work. Now, be careful, because I had a boy who used to like Michael Jackson YouTube clips, and he found ones that went for like 2 hours. So you need to be very careful. Make sure the games can be paused. Make sure the YouTube clips can be paused. So, I'm always learning. I call myself a pracademic, which is a practical academic, and the children are always teaching me, oh, Sue, watch out. That didn't work. And that's okay. We can work from that. Now, I just wanted to also mention, because this is a behaviour podcast, every year I reread 2 books, and I've just been rereading them because I always like to start the year with them, and they're called Autism Spectrum Disorder and De-Escalation Strategies by Steve Brown, and it is just a fantastic book. I'll probably do a whole podcast on it, but I highly recommend that you have a look at it. It's a brilliant book, and it really is all this stuff I'm talking about, that how do we de-escalate behaviour? And it's about putting in those positive, proactive strategies, understanding autism spectrum is different to neurotypical kids, and how do we model? How do we reduce pressure? How do we use the right words? How do we put in place all those proactive strategies? And it's really great, and it's got some good stuff on sensory too, because some of my children behaviour comes from their sensory. So I highly recommend you have a look at that book, and it's a very practical guide designed from him going in and supporting children in school. So it's relevant for both home and school. A parent put me onto it originally, and I reread that book every year. And it is an easy read. A lot of it you'll be going, yep, doing it. The other one is my number one book. I probably reread this twice a year, actually. It's called From Anxiety to Meltdown. And it is brilliant because it has sensory meltdowns, behaviour meltdowns, and tantrums. It was the first book I ever read that had tantrums. And I actually got this book when I first I got sent a pre-book to read, and I was on a plane from Sydney to Brisbane, which is about an hour and a half flight. I literally read the book in the hour and a half, and I was near the end when the flight landed, and I was like, I didn't want to get off the plane. I was so engrossed in the book. It was just like, I just kept going, oh, I know a kid like that. I know a kid like that. Oh, yes. So, again, this is one of those books that the first time I read it, I highlighted so much of it, I had to buy a new copy because I basically highlighted the whole book. But those of you who have it, there's some really good stuff on page 74 on problem solving from the autistic viewpoint. And what I like, this book really helps you put yourself in the kid's shoes. Like I'm saying, we need to look at things from a neurodiverse viewpoint, not a neurotypical, yes? And the big thing she talks about that I just found so helpful was a thing called scripting, where children and adults have like a videotape in their mind how the day's going to look. And the smallest thing can go wrong, and then that causes the anxiety to rise. And how we can work with that scripting, and how she as an adult has found workarounds around scripting. And I really find that very important. And look, she talks about scripting throughout the whole book, and obviously as part of the anxiety. And so I highly recommend you read the book, because there are so many aha moments if you understand scripting and why scripting really underpins a lot of the anxiety. So I remember when I read the book, I had a little student called Jessica, and if I just gave her the wrong chair, she had a chair with a little bit of purple on it, that would just cause her anxiety to go through the roof. So that, although I've been talking about why traditional behaviour strategies don't work, one of the things I have learned over the years is choose your battles. So with Jessica, my goal was she sat in a chair. She obviously had a script. She only had about 8 words at that stage. That was her chair, because she was literal. When I say sit in your chair, can you hear? That's her chair. So if you put yourself in her shoes and her literalness, and if you're anxious, you want to be in control and everything to go a little bit the way you want. But then she talks about how we can help children and adults when things go off script. And I do think for many of my children, it is about respecting their need for order, but also helping them with those plan Bs you would have heard me talk about in my other podcasts. Now, I know today is a longer podcast, but it is so important that we do understand what traditional behaviour strategies don't work for many of the kids with ASD, ODD, ADHD. It is probably something I could talk about for 5 hours. And I am hoping this year to put together like a whole behaviour course, because I feel it's timely and that we really do need to understand and support these children in a proactive and positive way. So I hope that you've sort of had a few aha moments yourself. I highly recommend put on the blog and the podcast the questions to ask yourself, the books that I've recommended for reading. I honestly think if you've got children with challenging behaviour, I would love you to just walk away now and look on your bookshelf and go, okay, have I got some books there I should read? Because there's a difference between having the book and reading the book and then doing the book. So I always say this between knowing and doing. So now's a great chance to think, oh, am I saying no? Am I telling the child what to do? Have I read that book on my bookshelf? Is it a good time to reread it? Like I say, I reread these books every year because I forget things, or I meet children who make me go, oh, yeah, I need to do that. So today, just take a moment, go and look on your bookshelf, grab a book off, and, even if you read for 10 minutes a day, that's an hour over the next week. And most of the books I'm recommending, like Tony Attwood, don't read that from top back to front, but From Anxiety to Meltdown and Autism Spectrum and De-escalation Strategies. If you've read them before, you'll reread them in a couple of hours. And you can flick through to the bits that are of interest. But I highly recommend really get some of those books out and reread them. And if you don't have them, maybe think about having them this year, so you have something in your toolbox. So you've got something there to refer to and help you. I mean, I meet people who spend hours on YouTube or, reading stuff when books are so well written. There's so many well-written books. Facebook is great, but you can go down that rabbit hole and spend more than 10 minutes a day on Facebook reading stuff when you can read a book that has been probably spent 2 years writing a book normally, that is well curated and edited, than on Facebook that you can go down a rabbit hole. So that's my thinking at the moment. I think I'm better off investing a bit of time in reading a really well thought out book that's written well and step by step, than getting caught up in a whole lot of posts and things on Facebook that often just spontaneously put up, which is great, but it's not that well curated written book that gives me in-depth understanding and knowledge. So I hope, up to you. You don't have to agree with me. As always, I'm just sharing my thoughts. I hope there's been some helpful ones for you. Well, I hope you're all inspired to go and look at your bookshelf and work out which books you've got, and then jump on my website to get the buy two, get one free. So I hope this has given you some ideas about resources that can make a difference to you and the children you teach. It's like having me in your classroom if you have my books. So many people turn up to my workshops for me to sign them, and you can tell how loved they are, and I absolutely love that. I forgot to say, teacher assistants, the red and blue teacher assistant books will be a game changer for you. They're spiral bound because you're meant to flick through them, photocopy them, share them, or don't photocopy the whole book, but share them with each other. So if I was a teacher assistant, I would get the red and blue teacher assistant books plus the Ultimate Guide to School and Home. Or maybe if you're in the early years, get the early years or essential guide. That would be great. Or get the mega book as your bonus. So jump on now. Get your books. Parents who are listening, remember, sometimes you need to be the library for your educators. So jump on now. Get your buy two, get one free. And I hope that you can find some amazing tips and strategies to make a difference to you and the children you know.